Many people in the state of New Jersey are eligible to get an extra stimulus check, and this New Jersey stimulus check is primarily for those who didn't qualify for the federal stimulus payment sent last year. If you're ready for some stimulus checks, then continue watching this video. The New Jersey stimulus check is part of the Excluded New Jerseyans Fund. New Jersey has set aside $40 million in federal money for this fund. According to the program's website, the Excluded New Jerseyans Fund provides a one-time direct cash benefit to households who were excluded from both federal stimulus checks and crisis unemployment assistance. Those eligible for the New Jersey stimulus check would get a one-time $2,000 check, and a household can receive up to $4,000. New Jersey recently replenished the Excluded New Jerseyans Fund in the amount of $40 million. Also, the authorities extended the deadline to the end of February, following backlash after the state diverted $34 million of the fund's unused money for state expenses. Now, since the IRS first sent out stimulus checks, many have wondered how it will affect their taxes. Stimulus money is technically a tax credit, which means it doesn't count as income and normally won't raise your tax bill. If you received an overpayment, that's a different story, and you may need to repay that on your taxes. Now, for example, single filers who made at least $80,000 were not eligible to receive the stimulus check that was sent down in 2021. But what if you made $75,000 in 2020 and then $100,000 in 2021? You would have received a stimulus check based on your 2020 income, even though you wouldn't qualify based on your 2021 returns. So the recovery rate credit is a tax credit available to those who did not get as much stimulus money as they should have. If you're still owed stimulus checks, you can claim a recovery rebate credit.
Tons of money. We just spent trillions of dollars and we don't have it. So we had to borrow that money. As we borrowed that money, then the Federal Reserve prints more money, and that money floods into the circulation and it devalues what we have. What does that mean? Higher prices. So when you go to the grocery store and you see the rising prices of vegetables, fruits, everything, and especially meat, it's because we spent too much money. We borrowed too much money.
President Biden is now announcing that the Senate is very close to passing a massive spending bill. Bernie Sanders is pushing Congress for another vote on a relief package, and Americans are currently experiencing financial difficulties right now, so a fourth stimulus check would definitely help many people across the nation. So we have very exciting news, and it's that President Biden just announced recently that Democrats are close to passing his spending bill, which will include many relief provisions for the people. Biden said during his speech that, "In my Build Back Better, can lower prescription prices, and now we just have to get it through the U.S. Senate." During his speech, President Biden recognized that new federal data shows worsening inflation in January, but President Biden tried to turn it into a sales pitch for a spending bill, which would help buy families and seniors. The bill currently includes child care and home health care, everybody. Biden said inflation is up, and it's up, but the fact is that if we're able to do the things that I'm talking about here, it will bring the cost for average families down. Biden claimed his bill is fully paid for with new taxes, and therefore is not going to worsen inflation. Everybody, it's important to remember that the Congressional Budget Office has said that the bill would add $367 billion in unfunded spending. The House passed the sprawling bill with a $2.2 trillion price tag back in November. Manchin has criticized his fellow Senate Democrats of gimmicks that undercounted its true cost by making new programs. Inflation has tanked Biden's popularity. The White House has previously described inflation as transitory, while Biden himself claimed in December that the prior month's 6.8% annual inflation rate was likely to peak. Joe Biden also said in July that inflation was temporary, when it was around 5%. Joe Biden has already passed large stimulus bills. Biden's third stimulus bill, followed by partisan legislation in 2020, and that doled out about $4 trillion to keep the U.S. afloat. Now, Biden has signed in November a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, and he argued it would ultimately lower inflation. Now, Bernie Sanders has also called on Senate Democrats to vote on legislation to lower the cost of prescriptions. Bernie Sanders says, "We're voting for an assistant secretary of something, and the American people are not staying up nights worrying about that. They're worried about prescriptions." Lowering prescription prices was a key part of the Democratic agenda. So do you think it's going to get done, everybody? Tell me in the comments down below.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all the witnesses for being here. Mick, it's always good to see you, my friend. I'm glad you're here and glad you're doing what you're doing. You know, the premise of this hearing is absurd. I can't believe we're actually having a hearing to talk about doing away with the debt limit. You got to be kidding me. I mean, it's obvious the negative consequences of.
But it does not make sense to me, nor do I think it makes sense to the American people. Mr. President, in terms of the microchip industry, the American people should know the truth. We are talking about an industry that has shut down over 780 manufacturing plants in the United States and eliminated 150,000 American jobs over the last 20 years as a result of moving their production overseas. Shut down plants in America, moved overseas for cheap labor. In other words, in order to make more profits, these companies closed plants in America and hired people, sometimes at starvation wages, in other countries. And now, believe it or not, these very same people, very same companies, are in line to receive $53 billion in corporate welfare to literally undo the damage that they caused. Now, some of my colleagues make the point that the microchip industry is enormously important for our economy and that we must become less dependent on foreign nations for microchips. I agree. There is no argument about that. But we can and must accomplish that goal, breaking our dependence on foreign countries for microchips. We must accomplish that goal without simply throwing money at these huge corporations while the taxpayer gets nothing in return. Mr. President, I suspect 5 major semiconductor companies will likely receive the lion's share of this taxpayer handout. They are Intel, Texas Instruments, Micron Technology, Global Foundries, and Samsung. These 5 companies in line for a $53 billion bailout made over $75 billion in profits last year. The company that will likely benefit the most from this taxpayer assistance is Intel. I have nothing against Intel. I wish them the very best. But let us be clear. Intel is not a poor company. Intel is not going broke. Far from it. In 2021, Intel made nearly $20 billion in profits.